your host, Natasha Janelle, and I'm here today with the wonderful Sandra Salvato. How are you doing today, Sandra?
I'm doing very well and I'm happy to be here.
Gratitude for coming. We definitely appreciate you for coming down. How are you today?
Good. We had a nice morning. The drive here was beautiful and I am looking forward to participating in this. Yes.
Gratitude. We are looking forward to it as well. So, just to kind of get things flowing here, Sandra, you came down here today to talk about your life's journey. And so we just are going to just dive in and you take us into what it was like growing up Sandra Salvato. And you started life in New York.
Yes, yes.
Right.
I
It
was,
was Long Island to be exact.
yes. Yep. I
Okay.
grew up in Kings Park, which is the North Shore of Long Island. I had two parents, mother and a father, and three brothers. And my mom had four children in 5 years.
Mm.
When she got pregnant the first time with my brother, she was told it was a hysterical pregnancy because she was unable to have children.
Wow.
And for 6 months, my mother was pregnant with no medical care because they kept telling her to see a psychiatrist. It was impossible for her to be pregnant. And obviously, they were very wrong. So she pushed out four kids in 5 years.
Wow.
And we grew up, like I said, in Kings Park. But my dad was a New York City fireman. My mom was a stay at home mom for most of my childhood. But early on, I had some very challenging health issues. From the age of 6, I was in the hospital for weeks with Legionnaire's disease. I think after that, it just created an abundance of health challenges. But we managed, we tried to do things that were healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother was very good at proper nutrition and proper exercise and that type of thing. But then I had a very tragic event at the age of 12. And I know in our society today, many, many young men and young women are hurt by people that they trusted or
Right.
they expected they should be able to trust.
Right.
And it's such a difficult experience to unravel when you're young. And so when I was 12, I was raped by a family member, a cousin, and some friends of his in the city, outside in an alleyway, actually, due to an event that was happening inside a brownstone in the city. But they covered up their crime. And, I was only with my dad, and he did not know what happened to me. So for years, no one in my family knew. But when you're 12 and you're hurt like that from people you see every day,
Right.
and you don't share that experience, it becomes a detriment to the rest of your life. And I think of something I feel very strongly about now is that when young people or anyone goes through that level of trauma, it's important that they tell someone, that they don't have to tell on someone if they're not comfortable and they're in fear, but someone should know that they were hurt
Right.
because you can't recover on your own. It's almost impossible. And I learned that now, I think, but it could have saved so much trauma and so many bad decisions, which I think is what altered my course, is that I'd never told anyone. And eventually I found ways of covering up my own pain. And I think that's what happened with alcohol and drugs when I was very young. I think I was about 13 the first time I smoked pot.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was just easy to get to. But then, I upgraded with more and more illegal drugs. I became a cocaine user, a crystal meth user, a mushroom user, like pretty much anything I could get my hands on to try to quiet what was happening inside. And it was, you can look back on that now. And I think it's important that if we're capable of sharing those experiences so someone can learn how to avoid that level of trauma or the level of trauma we then do to ourselves afterwards,
Right.
I'd be willing to share almost anything. I don't know how much you want me to share or if there's
Yeah.
questions you have.
Well, it's okay. It's okay. I do have questions, and it's just more or less. I want you to open up as much as you feel comfortable opening up. That way, these young people or even older people have a ways of identifying some things and relatability in what you were thinking and what you were going through in those moments are very, very helpful. So yes,
Okay.
please, if you would like to go into a little bit more detail, we would love to get that information so that we can share that.
Sure. Yeah. So the detail about what actually happened, or detail as to more of how it impacted me.
Both.
Both. So I was at a wedding, which was the event in the city, and my mother was sick. She couldn't go. So my dad took me. And it was in the brownstones in the basement. And my family, extended family, they pretty much lived all in one building in the city, like every apartment. So the basement they turned into like a banquet hall for events.
Hmm.
And this was a second wedding. So it was an older aunt and uncle. And my father, it was his family, his aunt and uncle. And so he wanted to go, but he didn't want to go alone. And my dad didn't always pay as much attention to the children as my mother did.
Hmm.
So he sat me. He was an amazing man. He passed about 10 years ago. But he sat me at a table with family and felt that that was safe.
Right.
And then he went to the adults. Well, I was only 12, and I was very well developed at the age of 12. I appeared much older. And so these kids got me alcohol. I had never really drank before. I think it was a screwdriver, so it's kind of an orange juice, right, vodka mix. I remember drinking it. I remember not really liking it, but I remember wanting to fit in
Right.
with my cousins. I was alone. I didn't have my brothers with me. I didn't have Isabella around. Wasn't even born yet. So I just pretty much sat there expecting that it would be safe because these were people I felt were family. But it quickly became very unsafe. And so once I lost my inhibitions, I guess, from the alcohol and all that, they easily maneuvered me outside. And I can remember being held down. I can remember the, it was almost like a separation from myself in the event where you could see it more than feel it more.
Hmm.
The trauma was overwhelming. I think I started to split almost in my head. I was diagnosed probably 15 years later with DID, which is a dissociative disorder. And that event was the beginning of that disorder because it allowed me to create an alternate way of managing that circumstance. But now, after that event, they cleaned me up. They brought me back into the home. They put me in a bed. And they told my father I got drunk and fell down the stairs, which would explain my condition, I guess. So when he came to me, he was angry because he thought I got drunk and fell down the stairs. And we never spoke about it.
Hmm.
I remember the hour and a half ride home. He later shared with me, I don't really remember it, that all I kept saying was, "Don't tell mom." So he must have really thought I knew drinking would be wrong, that
Right.
I did something wrong. So it became a secret.
Mm.
And I think that now as an adult, if I was ever to reach somebody who has a secret like that, it's not worth keeping, ever. Ever. It's never worth keeping. The damage it does to you can't be compared to the damage we think it might do to someone else. And I guess I didn't want to hurt my parents as a child.
Right.
I think many young people feel that it's their fault. They don't want to get in more trouble, or they don't want to be a disappointment. But that was not on me. And that could never be on another child. A sense of responsibility. It could never be. But we think it is. And I would hope that if somebody is hearing this and they feel that they're young and they've experienced this, or even if they're my age now and they've experienced it but they've never shared it, they need to share it.
Right.
That's the only way healing begins. And so that for me didn't happen until I was much, much older. Like I said, probably 15 years later. And it then caused me to have all of these other issues, which was drugs and alcohol and anger. Oh my word, I can't even describe the anger that you have when you don't understand yourself or the people around you anymore, because nobody felt safe. This was somebody I had to see every day because he lived around the corner. I went to school with his brother. You know, it was a constant reminder. We would have family events, and he would just use it as an opportunity to keep me quiet and scared of exposing what he had done and what had happened. So I never shared it, like I said, for many years. When I finally did share it, of course, my dad wanted to go and kill him. And what we found was that he couldn't because he was already in prison. We had moved from that area probably just a few years later. So we didn't keep in touch. But once it came out what had happened, my father went looking for family that was involved. And my one cousin, who was the ringleader, he was already in prison. He had hurt somebody else. And I have to tell you, that was equally as devastating for me. Because then we think about, you know, could I have protected someone else sooner? And so I live with that. And that's hard sometimes to manage when you think about it. But you have to be reminded that I was a child.
Right.
And it wasn't until I had an adult capability that I could even understand what had happened. So for children out there, parents who have children, anybody who knows of somebody who they think may have been hurt. And it's interesting how it came out that I got hurt. My brother read an article about incest, victims of incest. He read it in a magazine. It was actually an Awake article, and it described the behaviors of somebody who was young and had gone through some type of sexual abuse or trauma. And he brought the article to my mom and said, "This sounds like Sandra. Do you think something could have happened to her?" My mother said, "I have no idea." So he said, "We should ask her." And my mother said, "She'll deny it."
Right.
So my brother, my older brother, said, "Blame me. She'll protect me." And that's what they did. So my mother came to me one day, we were talking, she started asking questions, and I did deny it. And then she said, with all the confidence in the world, "I don't believe you, and I think it was your brother." And when she said that, I immediately went into defense mode and said it wasn't him. So she knew it was someone else. And then the truth came out. But it's because somebody else was paying attention. And I will always be grateful to him for recognizing that and caring enough to consider it and take the risk. I mean, I can't imagine anybody who would be willing to say that. And he did. And that's how the story finally came out.
Mm.
So I was in my 20s then. Yeah, it had taken a very long time to unravel that. And that's also, too, when we started to recognize my ability to disassociate. And so sometimes I would lose my memory of events. And it took years for me to be able to put that all together for myself. But, you know, by this time I didn't do well in school anymore, and I couldn't hold a job, and I was very transient almost because relationships were difficult if people found out your secret.
Right.
So we just kind of lived under the radar, which is really nowhere to live. You don't ever feel connected. Everything feels like there's a gap. And so I think that's how I spent most of my 20s and 30s, was just feeling unconnected. I sometimes felt a responsibility towards others, and I think many people who go through different levels of abuse or degrees of challenges will sometimes have a overcompensation to help others.
Right.
And I use that to keep me going. If somebody needed something, I would be the first one to volunteer. I think I looked for purpose. when I think we lose purpose when we're hurt like that as children. But that's just me. I can only, again, speak to what I know were my experiences. I don't know if I've ever really heard other people share theirs in a lot of detail.
Right. So what about therapy? I know you did finally go to therapy. What was your experience like?
Yeah, it didn't start well. I can remember when this became a challenge, when The Secret finally became out. My family wanted to do family therapy to get me into therapy. And I recommend no one ever doing this. So my parents came and said they thought all of us should go to therapy together. And I was in agreement to that because I thought as a family we could use it. So we got to the therapist's office, and my 3 brothers, my parents and I, and the woman comes, the receptionist, and she hands me a clipboard to fill out paperwork. Okay, so I'm filling it out, and I'm thinking, well, maybe she only has 1 clipboard, because there's 6 of us in this room.
Right.
But nobody else got that clipboard. So it was a ruse. It was, almost like a trick. They figured I would come because I thought I was doing something for us as a family.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I would have gone on my own. But now I felt like they weren't honest either. And one thing that is very important to me, and it always has been since I can remember, is honesty. I don't care if what you have to tell me is bad news. I just want it to be honest news. Because I can deal with anything horrific or bad or upsetting if it's honest. And I think honesty is very important to survivors.
Right.
So when they were dishonest as a family unit, it did backfire. And it caused me and them, I don't know, a rift because the trust was broken. We didn't accomplish much in that therapy session. And I think I avoided therapy out of anger for quite a while. But then I left the area. I moved out of state. I started to find a way of surviving independently. And I got a good job with the phone company. It was back in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And I got a really good boss. And she took notice of my emotional state, I guess, at times. And she recommended therapy. And she recommended it in a way that she told me I didn't have to worry about my job, that if I got the help I needed, that they would keep my job. So she knew I had a drug issue. It finally became apparent because I was using cocaine as a way of keeping myself functioning. And she finally picked up on the signals, brought me in her office and said these were my options. And that's when I went into therapy. So I was probably not even 30. I was like 28, 29 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And I entered therapy. And for the first time, I think I had somebody convince me that this was not all my fault. And that's what started the beginning of the healing. But it didn't happen right away.
Right.
I was 28. I was in and out of therapy. I've been in and out of rehab. I have attempted suicide a few times. I think I've used drugs and alcohol as a way of hoping it would kill me. And I became to my friends and my associates like remember the commercial about Mikey, he'll eat anything? I was like the person who, if there was a risk and people were unsure of it, well, ask Sandra because she'll probably do it. And I did. I would jump off of the highest cliff into the water, not knowing how deep it was or how cold it was. I would hike into the cave, not knowing if there was risk of wildlife, like whatever it was we were doing. If we had if we wanted to smoke a plant, but nobody knew what it was, I'll try it. And I think I realized it was like a death wish. I wasn't afraid to die. I was hoping something would kill me, but it was a way of stopping the pain. And therapy eventually is kind of like letting the air out of a balloon just a little at a time. Sometimes it would close and I'd be stuck with that heaviness again, but then I'd get some help and some of that air would come out. I guess a lesson now learned was keep going. And don't stop even when you hate it.
Right.
Even if it feels like it's not working. Sometimes you don't realize it's working until years later. And then you're able to use that advice and that help for someone else. And that's what helps us heal. I think anytime you can use your pain to encourage someone else. And when you go through AA or NA, they have the 12-step program and things like that. And so I follow that. And of course, it talks about a higher power. But the principle of that first step, I think, is it's something that you can't deny the validity of. If you don't have faith in something greater than yourself, it is almost impossible to heal because we are very self-deprecating, I think, as a natural inclination in the world today.
Right.
We're always taking responsibility for other people's actions and then our own as well, but it impacts our decisions. And once you realize that there's a force greater than yourself, that there is a higher power. And I don't, some people refer to it as God and spiritual. Some people have other views, and I don't want to influence that, but I would influence that for people to search for something greater than themselves that gives them what they need to push
Right.
through their pain. Because without it, it's hard to do.
So, what were some of the signs that your brother noticed?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, what were some of the signs that he noticed? And that way we can kind of point out
What
so
other
people can
people? Sure.
identify. Mhm.
Well, like I said, what happened to me happened when I was 12. And at this time, my family, just my brothers and I and my parents, I was always happy and I always took care of them. We had fun as a family. Like I can remember family vacations and trips and things that there was no negative aspect in my behavior.
Mhm.
Then all of a sudden, I didn't want to go anywhere with the family anymore. Mostly because we were with family when this event had happened. And I think I just internalized that fear. So I went from a very happy child who was very social with my brothers, with our friends, and everything, to someone who all of a sudden no longer had an interest in that. And then that led to things would make me angry very quickly. And I don't ever remember being angry as a young person, as a really young kid. But now, absolutely. I was always fighting with my brothers. I had never fought with them before. They would fight with each other,
Mhm.
but I was usually the mediator, and I would calm it down. I can even remember, and I'll again be dating myself, the movie like Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's
Mhm.
okay. So there's a scene in it with the king and the queen, and it's I think the king's birthday, and they're singing a song to each other, but they're trying to kill each other while they're singing the song. It's like you're my little coochie face, my coochie woochie coochie little coochie face, as they're trying to literally kill each other. And I can remember thinking, like when my parents would fight or things would happen in the household, that was my go-to song. I would sing it for the family, and we would all crack up laughing because we all recognized it from that movie.
Right.
And it kind of like would dissuade the anger. Like as a family unit, it just became something we did. I don't think I ever sang that song again after that event. And I think he knew that because obviously my parents still would have their fights. My dad would come home, he'd be in a bad mood. I would sing him that song and he would crack up laughing. I stopped. I became withdrawn. I became secretive. And I never had secrets because the truth was always important. But now I couldn't expose the truth anymore, so I had to have secrets.
Right.
And then because of the disassociation, I didn't have a lot of memories of things. Things would happen and I would be clueless as to them, and that my brother didn't understand. And I think that's what he saw, my pulling away. And I was never that way as a child. Very social.
And so there was a transition you spoke about. So you were in New York and then you transitioned to the Florida area.
Right. And that was because of me. I think we left when I was 14 and went to Florida because my parents felt that they still didn't know the event, but they felt that they wanted to get me away from the people now I was spending time with. So I went from these very friendly, kids, I'd bring them home, I'd play at their house, they'd play at my house, to now I had friends my parents didn't like. I went to the dark side of the school friends. I had the rougher kids. I got involved with the kids who were using drugs or who were more violent and more angry. Who knows why? I never asked them.
Right.
But my parents didn't know how to break it because I could walk to my school. So there was no way they could really intervene other than to remove me from the environment. So my dad did his 20 years at the fire department. He put in his retirement, and we moved to Florida in like 1980. And it didn't work. I went to Florida, which was like the drug capital of the East Coast.
Right.
It like all comes to Florida and then it goes other places.
Right.
I can remember in high school we had drug day, which was Thursday. So you knew what dealer to go to, where to meet them, what to get. Like it was just an available thing. I had much easier access into stronger drugs in Florida. So they did move us, and I got worse. I didn't do well in school. I think they graduated. I graduated because they didn't want me there anymore. It's like, this is way too much work. She's smart enough. We'll just get her out. And that's what happened. I never went to college. I never really pursued higher education. I went into waitressing, cleaning, things that were more transient you could do anywhere.
Right.
And then I think I was 18, and I decided I wanted to be a massage therapist, and I went to massage school. And while I was in massage school, I met a very creative group of friends, very different now. I was like 20. And they were more into holistic things. But some of them, they thought any pot or anything you could smoke or pretty much any drug you got was holistic. So they would use it. It was still illegal and very dangerous and very bad for us. But we did a lot more. And once that happened, I realized I only worked to feed a habit. I lived in different places with different friends. I got in the car at 19 or 20 and I drove to California by myself. I got a CB radio and I just packed up my apartment, put everything in the car and drove to Lake Tahoe, California. I met truckers along the way and I was very fortunate. They kept me safe. It could have gone horribly wrong because I will tell you, I was driving during the Bundy days, and I am a white female, brunette, who looked like every victim he had. And we ran in every state almost simultaneously, but I never crossed his path. But I would have been an easy target for a man like that. I've been in those situations so many times, it's bizarre. You remember the DC shooter?
Mm-hmm.
I was driving the car and I left the gas station 20 minutes before he shot and killed the man standing at the pump where I got my gas. 20 minutes later, it came across my radio. I had just left that gas station. 9/11, I was supposed to be on the American Airlines flight 11. I canceled my flight 6 days before 9/11. And I can remember sitting at home. And so I think of all these like near-death experiences and I don't know what kept me safe, except for the fact that once I became more knowledgeable to my trauma and my choices, I started recognizing I can't push myself into circumstances that are dangerous anymore. And when I didn't feel right or I didn't feel good, I would step back. I used to push myself more. But I look back now, and even just talking about it, sometimes I can even make connections now I don't think I've made before, where those events, I just kind of walked away from instead of spending time trying to find a solution or help someone else. But I don't know, it's confusing even when you talk about it, how all the different events affect you in your life. But I've had so many of those near death experiences, like could have been so much worse. I call them near death because I just kind of removed, I don't know, luck. I don't know what you would call it.
You had some car accidents that you got in.
Yes. I was in Florida, most of them, but I was hit from behind and I rolled a vehicle. I was a passenger and we rolled in I rolled a few vehicles, which led to many medical problems, which, by the way, leads to more drug use. So it becomes a constant battle. I've had 17 surgeries and I've probably been in a hospital over 200 times. Even right now today, I'm dealing with health issues that are unexplainable. Like, as I said before, I'm thin, but I've never been thin. I'm a healthy Italian woman. Usually, I am like about 60 pounds lighter in the last year, and no one knows why. I have what they call a Chiari malformation, which is a very rare brain disorder where your cerebellum is falling into like your spinal canal. It's compressing and stopping your cerebral fluid flow, which is important to your brain and your brain function. It's not a curable thing. It can sometimes get better with surgery, but I've already had surgery for a different neurological disorder called trigeminal neuralgia, which again is a very rare disorder. To describe it, it's like if somebody came up behind you, a pro baseball player came up behind you and hit you in the head with a bat. That initial pain is what trigeminal neuralgia does to you. It compresses your trigeminal nerve and it causes such a horrific pain. You feel it knocks you to the ground because it feels like somebody just whacked you in the head with a bat. But as soon as that immense pain hits your body, it also leaves you. So it knocks you down and you're fine. And you have to explain that because now you're fine. After many tests and scans and doctors, they did brain surgery and they had to unravel I had a blood vessel that was compressing the trigeminal nerve and they had to unravel it and then put a protective sheath over the trigeminal nerve and it stopped that. We think that might have caused my Chiari malformation to get worse, which I now am more symptomatic of, which is the weight loss. We've checked me for every gastrointestinal disorder on the planet, and none of them explain the weight loss, but the Chiari malformation does, and we can't fix that. So it's it's like your life follows you. If you're young and you're hearing this, recognize it now because you really can't escape it. I have what they call mesenteric ischemia, which is a result of the cocaine use. It has now damaged my intestines, so there's not as much of a blood flow there. And that's giving me, challenges with my health. But all of these things kind of unfolded from trauma and then my bad choices based on that trauma of drugs and alcohol and eating poorly and abusing myself with lack of sleep or whatever it might have been at the time. It will follow you. You might escape it for years, but it'll follow you. And that's where I am now, dealing still with health issues. Now, one thing I notice differently is I am more aware of the impact it has on others.
Mm.
When you're young and you're hurting or you're sick, or you only think it impacts you. But when you see people who love you look at you with pain in their face for the pain you're dealing with, oh my word, it is a difficult process to get yourself through because you can't right now change your health, but you see how it negatively impacts the people who care about you, and that can weigh on a person. So if you can protect yourself better now, again, it only comes from sharing the secrets. I really believe if you don't share your secrets, you can't heal. And what I'm grateful for is Isabel. You know, she's much younger than me. She came much later. We're 20 years apart. So we've only been sharing really my life with her life for the last 12 years, 10 years. And that's when I've noticed that I'm more manageable. I've been healing because the secrets are being shared. And there's no shame in that.
Right.
She's helped me not have shame in that. If you find someone or if you're someone who wants to help someone, that's the key. You have to protect them from their shame because shame is a killer. I believe people who end up committing suicide or hurting themselves. I was a cutter for about 5 years. I have scars all over my body from cutting to heal because it felt like a secret came out. It felt like a release because I couldn't voice it. I couldn't speak it. So again and again I would cut, but nothing changed. When we would finally talk about things, it was the release. It was the air coming out of that balloon. And I stopped cutting over, I don't know, since we've really been living together and I've had someone safe that I could express when I want to cut. Like I could say to Isabel, I think I have this need to cut, and she could walk me through it. That's what people need to find.
Right.
A therapist, a friend, a family member, even a suicide prevention hotline person could be that person that you could share something with and not have the shame. If you're going to have shame, I say keep it. But if you wanted to help somebody that you know is suffering, that's the piece you need to keep from them, is they have to be able to share their story, share their pain, share their crazy thinking, because we know when we have all of us know when we have crazy thinking.
Right.
But that thinking is still real, and it still causes an abundance of emotions that I think it's sometimes hard when we're young to know how to manage. You got to get the secrets out. You got to be able to feel safe talking to someone, and you have to know that there's no shame coming back to you from that person. And then you start to heal.
And I think another great thing is just letting people get that if someone is coming and they're trusting you to be that sacred space for them, knowing how to care for them when they bring that information to you. Watch being intentional about your words and the things that you're saying when that information is there, because that too is detrimental and it can be for people, especially if you're being received and, you know, told so many different things that you're damaged or, just you have to be mindful when you have that person and they're expressing these things to you. So,
Yes.
Yeah, we need to be able to share and be mindful.
I
Yeah.
agree. I think that you're so right. As the person who's hearing somebody else's story or supporting them through that process, it's just a matter of listening and acknowledging and letting them know that it doesn't change who they are. What happens to you doesn't have to become you.
That's right.
But as children, it's the only development we know. We become how we're raised. So if you're raised with trauma, if you're raised with shame and guilt and fear, you become that. So as someone who's helping that person, you have to recognize it's okay that that's who they think they are right now, and listen and let them express it and acknowledge it, and then reinforce their value, that there's no shame. Those things happen to people. It doesn't mean that's who they are.
Lead with love.
Always.
Always lead with love.
And love of someone else first. I think in society today, especially since COVID and the insanity of the world, TikTok, Facebook, we just promote the anger in our society. Every now and then I see a message or a story of peace or triumph or just self sacrificing love and offering. Look at what's happening right now in Florida. I have very, very good friends there who lost their home. Now, granted, it was a $1.6 million home, but they still lost it.
Right.
There was a very wealthy community over there, Sanibel Island. These are $1 million homes. It doesn't exist anymore. These are people who didn't even know each other mostly. But now they're coming together as a community. Imagine if that community had come together before the hurricane. There probably wouldn't have been such a loss of life.
Mm.
More people would have been saved the trauma of the experience of going through that. But we're not a community anymore, this country. We're individuals. We separate ourselves based upon our ages, our sizes, our colors, our whatever. Our eye colors, could be anything. Our handicaps, our disabilities. We create groups. We don't say we're human. That's the
Right.
only group we should all belong to, is the group of humanity.
That's right.
And that then requires loving someone else before you love yourself. And I think we live in a society that teaches us the opposite. Everything is about self-gratification.
Definitely.
I come first. Why? Why should anybody come first? If you put, and even, what's the golden rule? There's more happiness in giving than there is in receiving. That's not a false statement. I would challenge anyone on the planet to put that to test. Test it out. You start putting people before you. You start giving before you expect something back, and see if you don't find more joy. Ask anybody right now who's sending stuff to South Florida if they're not feeling good about what they're doing, because they're giving to people who they recognize have had a traumatic experience. It doesn't have to be that global an experience. It could be your next door neighbor.
That's right.
It could be the kids who stand outside your house when they're waiting for the school bus that you're so annoyed at because they're kind of noisy. But you know what? Those kids just might need a nice neighbor to acknowledge them, to allow them that moment of play before they get on a tough ride to school and have a tough day at school. I just think we're more interested in our own comfort in life now than in comforting someone else. And
Right.
I think we should start comforting others before we comfort ourselves, because we naturally get comforted back.
That's right. Because it's a 100-0 rule, and I forget the terminology that's used or the statement, but it's where you just take full accountability for everything, and you don't expect anything in return. And so many people, even when they do something, they always feel like they have to have something back, or they expect something from someone else. Where the truth is, you did it because you chose to do it, and you stated that it makes you feel good. Well, if that's the case, then that's enough. Then you've done what you needed to do for yourself and for others. Right?
I agree. It's not natural anymore, though. What you just said and what we're talking about, it's just not natural. So how do we get back to that as a natural inclination? They use a term, theories of determinism. It technically means that we are so influenced by everything around us. It's a theory of determinism. So it's kind of like people will say things like, well, my mom or my dad had a bad temper, so I had a bad temper.
Right.
That's not hereditary.
Right.
That's a learned behavior.
That's right.
So you can unlearn it. We look at these things and think we inherited them, but we don't have to. If you had parents who maybe had financial challenges and you didn't eat well growing up, it doesn't mean you as an adult have an excuse to never eating well anymore. If your circumstances have changed and you have more reason, then take advantage of that. It doesn't have to be who we are.
Right.
If you come from an abusive household, you don't have to become an abuser. If we let it, it can. So if we're not used to taking care of others and being self-sacrificing and doing it just for the sheer sake of doing good to others, even when we do it, it's not going to feel right. You're not going to recognize that more happiness yet.
That's right.
You got to remind yourself there's more happiness in giving than receiving, that you did that because you didn't expect something. Our natural inclination right now is to expect something. So you have to remind yourself.
And you taught this in corporate America.
I did.
You did.
I did for a long time. And I think that's how I got into that field, is because I had a passion for people to try to be nicer to each other. And so when people would ask me for years, what did you do for a living? I would say I just taught people how to be nice to each other. And I did it in a corporate environment, but most of the value from my courses, I found people would tell me about, it helped them in their family life, with their children, with the people who are most important to them. And I could share one quick example
Okay.
if you want. I was
Yeah.
teaching a class on behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's like 4 basic ways people behave. One of the 4 ways is each of our natural inclination. It's kind of our go-to behavior. So for example, some people, you ever meet somebody who is very rule book oriented, like everything's about statistics and numbers, and I would say at work, if you have an employee and they ask you for the employee handbook, they read it and they pretty much know all the rules. But you might have another employee who you gave the handbook to and they're like, yeah, that's never happening. And they toss it because they are quick to make a response. They think on their feet. They don't care about the rules. They're the type of person who's more dominant in their personality. So they're going to take control of the situation. I describe them as, if I said, where would you like to go to eat today? And you were like, I don't know. And someone else said, I don't know. That'd be enough for me. I'd make the decision now because I can't handle this. But the person who's reading the rule book, they would make sure everybody had a fair chance before they made a decision. But then you also have the people who are the mediators in their role, naturally. They're kind of the person who just kind of is under the radar, and they kind of make an environment where everyone can just get along. And you also have somebody else who's now more emotionally intuitive and connected to the emotions that people have. They don't usually go more cognitive, they rely more emotionally. So they're just basic differences. We all live in all 4 of these behaviors. But when we're stressed or challenged, we have a dominant one. If you identify the dominant one in others, you know how to talk to them. And this is what I taught managers. So if I have an employee who's a rule book person, every time I ask them for something, I would give them a start time, an end time, and what the end results were, and all the tools that they had. So that person they call very conscientious. If I was working with a more dominant person, I would just give them the last result I want, and how they get there is on them, because they already got a plan. If I give them my plan, then it's never going to work.
Right.
I have somebody else now they call was more emotionally, right, invested. So this person, I would tell them the impact on others that this project was going to have. And now they're invested in doing it because they know it's going to help someone else. And then you have the mediator person who I probably wouldn't give a project to. I would make them a helper because they just want everyone to be happy. That's their more dominant role. And as a manager, when you identify those differences, you know how to encourage your workers to use their basic skills and do the best job. They feel good about their work and you get good results. So that's kind of just a basic for the employment. So this woman was in my class, and I was teaching in this business I was there for 2 weeks. So she was in my first grouping of classes. So the next week she comes to me and I heard her call my name. Now I have like 25 to 50 people in a class. I don't always remember everyone's name, but I recognized her. She came running up and she hugged me. And I was like, okay. I didn't know why. And she said, you just changed my life with my daughter. I said, how? She goes, I came to your class and my daughter was visiting family in Florida. I was in New York at the time. And she said, my daughter and I, she's 18, she just graduated high school, and we have not been good. We have not been friends. All we do is fight. In fact, I sent her to my family in Florida because I needed a break. I was hoping she might find something she was interested in there.
Mm-hmm.
So she goes, I had to pick my daughter up at the airport, and I kept thinking about everything you taught her me. And what I realized was my daughter is more dominant. She doesn't need time to think about stuff. She knows what she wants, it's in her, and she's quick to make a decision and act on it. That is not my natural tendency, this woman said. She goes, I need to make a contingency plan. I got to go through the pros and cons. I got to work out the list. So what would happen every time my daughter came to me with an idea, she would hear me point out a stumbling block to it. But in my head, I wasn't putting a stumbling block before her. I was helping her reach that goal. But she only heard the stumbling block. So our communication stopped dead in its track with the first word I said. She goes, and I kept thinking I was trying to help her. We kept fighting. So I'm picking her up at the airport, and I'm practicing, and I'm going through everything you said, and I realize I have to not give her any advice. Whatever she tells me, I'm just going to acknowledge it. So my daughter got off the plane. We greeted each other. We were good. I was like, so how was your trip? She goes, Mom, I found the college I want to go to. And she paused. She goes, normally I would have said, already? Really? Have you checked out these colleges? Because I was looking. Instead, I said, I am so happy to hear that. Because my daughter dropped everything in her hands and said, hold on, who are you? And what have you done with my mother? I've been practicing for 3 hours how I'm going to convince you that this is okay. Because you were going to tell me why it's not going to work. She said to her daughter, I know and I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be doing that to you. She goes, we cried and we spent that time together until 2 o'clock in the morning. I taught her what you taught me about me. And I realized what it was about her that was different. I now know I can't talk to my daughter that way. I got to let her have her idea. I got to let her figure it out. So what I said to her that night was, you know what? I'll think all the contingency plans, and when you think you need one, you come to me and I'll have them ready. I'm here to support you as your mom. As long as I know you're making a good decision, and if you want to pursue higher education, you're making a good decision. And she said from that moment on, she had a different approach to her family, and it changed everything.
Wow.
That's what this material can do for someone. It's easier when you have the time to think it through. And granted, I taught it for 20 years, but I'm sure my sister could tell you there are times I don't use it. Because we get caught up in our feelings and our own hurt and our own pain. But if you take the time, it's out there, you can learn it and you can recognize it in others. I know if somebody's talking to me and they're giving me all kinds of statistics, if I'm vague, they're going to shut down.
Right.
I know if somebody is very quick and direct to the point and I start giving them a lot of details, they're shutting down. If I focus on facts to someone who's only really affected by emotions, they shut down. And if I give somebody nothing but emotions who's only adjusted and only is affected by facts, they shut down. Just listen to how people talk, and I promise anybody can figure that out.
Now that's a gem. And some tools that helps in relationships, all the ships, every last ship you got. That is so beneficial. Gratitude, Sandra. Gratitude for you and your journey. Absolutely amazing. We appreciate you coming down and sharing with us today. It's been powerful.
Thank you. I was happy to participate, and I thank Isabel for finding you on Facebook.
Yes.
I would encourage anyone who found a way to heal. We all have different ways of healing.
Right.
I think if you found a way to heal that does not take advantage of anyone else, then that's what should be shared.
That's right.
Because we have to stop looking out for ourselves. If we start looking out for each other, we automatically take care of ourselves.
That's right. Gratitude again. I am your host, Natasha Janelle. We're here at Studio 125 Multimedia Complex. Again, gratitude for coming
Thank
down,
you for
Miss
having
Sandra
me.
Salvato. Peace.